First of all, we're going to talk about this event and who is hosting this event. This event is hosted by Dharma Realm Buddhist University, and we are a small liberal arts college based in broad Buddhist traditions. We read classic texts and see how they apply to our daily lives, basically. But what makes Dharma Realm so unique, basically, is that it gives a secular approach to Buddhist education that awakens our human potential through deep inquiry and practice, grounded in timeless principles from the great wisdom traditions of both East and West. Basically, this university tries its best to guide the students towards a profound understanding of the mind and aims to prepare them for the world today. And so tonight, our guest is Professor Doug Powers. He is a professor at DRBU and a long-term practitioner of Buddhism. And part of our team, of outreach team, we have Brenda and Rachel. You will see them around there. Today, we are going to have a chat with our Professor Doug Powers. We're going to toss him some questions about what do we do with some days of tumultuous emotions that we have that are so common nowadays. And he's going to share his wisdom with us, approaching some of the Buddhist knowledge and maybe some other insights. So we're going to start with a short clip, and then we're going to discuss. We're going to throw another question. We're going to have more discussion. And then we're going to open the space for everyone to ask questions. Okay, so this short clip, we took it from a very famous movie. Maybe you'll have heard about it. It is called Inside Out 2. And so the emotions are characters, and there's a story, and we can see how these emotions affect to the person who has it, right? And this film, the second one, I think they're one of the primary characteristics is that anxiety shows up, and we see how this teenager starts to deal with these new emotions. So we are gonna see this specific scene where anxiety takes over, and then I would like to ask something about it.
I'm not good enough. Oh no, what did I do? No. I can fix it. Come on, Riley, get it together. Come on, Riley, get it together. I'm not good enough. You have to score, Riley! I'm gonna do all of the things for now. I'm putting too much pressure on her. You don't get to choose who Riley is. Anxiety? You need to let her go. Protect her. But you're right. We don't get to choose who Riley is.
So the reason why I chose this scene was because I thought that it was very relatable I don't know how many people have felt anxiety in their daily life as a common emotion. And probably this is triggered by different situations. Um, Personally, I was relate. I felt relate because I also think that my anxiety is triggered by wanting to everything be perfect. And so I think that my mind goes try to only think in the future, what are the possibilities, what can go wrong, what can go right, what can I do to prevent it. So my mind is starts feeling like that scene specifically, just going around very messy, taking over. Where is me? What happened? It just like feels so chaotic. But something that I really appreciate is that in this clip, anxiety says that they will only trying to protect their person. And so we usually see anxiety as something bad. But I would like to ask you that what do you think that we can do to coexist in a healthy way with this kind of emotions that might not be there to affect us, but to protect us somehow. Yeah. So that's the first question.
So people wanted to have a little bit of discussion from the vantage point of a kind of Buddhist hermeneutic, not just from mindfulness. A lot of people I think here are probably familiar with being mindful, working with mindfulness, meditating with mindfulness. But there's a lot more to the totality of the way that Buddhism is coming at our moment-to-moment daily life. And this issue of emotions and anxiety is like the kind of fundamental issue for a kind of Buddhist psychology because uh, what the Buddha recognizes that the emotions that are arising, you're not going to be able to control the emotions that are arising because those come from past experiences. When we use the word karma, the main way that you're feeling karma is you're feeling the present through the experience of past experiences. And the way you feel the present through past experiences is through emotions. Emotions are the way you experience whatever by association you're feeling in the present in the past. And so the emotions then keep coming up, keep coming up. And so the Buddha says you can't necessarily control the emotions arising, but you can control the current decision as to whether you continue to attend to them or not. You can actually choose what emotions that you are going to attend to, and you have to learn what emotions you're going to attend to have the best outcomes in terms of how they lead you to certain kind of positive outcomes. And from a Buddhist view, the primary moral category is suffering. Does it lead to more suffering or less suffering for yourself and others? So you have to learn to understand what emotions lead to more suffering, what emotions lead to less suffering. If you think you're going to control the emotions, you're going to fail. But if you understand how to observe the present moment in terms of choosing to attend to which emotion, you can slowly but surely begin to get control over what emotions that you're choosing to pay attention to. Now, before you can do that, though, you have to trust that you actually have that power. Yeah, you actually have the freedom and power of mind to actually choose your emotion. I would say right now, the biggest problem that people have is they don't mostly believe they have that power. I would say most of you probably don't actually believe you have that power. And so that goes back one further step, and that's that you have to realize that in order to have that power, that you have to agree to take total responsibility in yourself for the present experience, and what comes from that experience is totally within your control and power in an ultimate sense. And the reason it's so hard for you to do that is because everything that we've been working in and taught in the last 30 or 40 years is in a deterministic mode. Everyone's thinking that they're in either a scientific determinism, a cultural determinism, or some form of determinism that's undermined the place where that sort of humanistic source of power, control, and freedom can actually be believed in, and actually that you have, like you could almost say, a right to that kind of freedom and that kind of choice. So you first of all have to believe that you have that kind of choice before you can find it. So uh, and then if once that you see that, once you see that you have that choice and then can practice that, you can actually observe that it's not repressing emotions, but choosing certain emotions over others because of the effect of those emotions, both in the present and the future.
Um, I have a question about it because I think that in theory sounds great, but maybe in practice, when we don't have developed, we can say like a muscle to have that type of control, how do we start? How can we start developing strength in that muscle? Because it sounds like for on one hand we have to let go of some things that we cannot control, but in another hand we have to develop a certain type of control. So yeah, what is a practical place where we can start?
Well, I actually think that you have to like yourself enough. I don't think you can gain the executive control. I don't think you can gain that control from simply trying to gain that control. I think the first problem that almost everybody in the modern world has is they don't respect or appreciate themselves at a profound enough level. They almost don't know, you don't even know if you actually deserve to exist. You're just constantly kind of entertaining and performing. And the anxiety comes from a constant performance and a constant distraction of your attention. So you don't have control over your attention. So until you can gain control over your attention, there's not really a place that you can observe this process from. So, but in order to gain control over your attention, you have to appreciate yourself enough. You have to believe you actually have a place in the universe and actually belong, not just as a performer and not just as a constant sense of distraction, but in actually settling with yourself in your own head, just being comfortable and appreciating yourself just sitting there, just sitting somewhere quietly, being comfortable with yourself. A very simple kind of human quality of existence. So my own suggestion is to start with the most simple level of settling with yourself in that kind of way and practice being comfortable with yourself. Now, in Buddhism, we have four infinite abodes that people practice to achieve this. The four of them are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And these four attitudes of mind give you a kind of basic frame, a basic mood, basic frame of reference that is an antidote to nihilism, negativism, judgmentalism, and so forth. So it seems to me like the first step of this is to just be able to settle with yourself, appreciate your awareness, your existence, gain control over your attention by relaxing and letting your attention settle. And then having at least this first aspect of a kind of loving kindness for the loving kindness allows you to be connected to everything and not just in your own head, not just like kind of isolated in a kind of narcissism, but a kind of comfort with yourself that kind of glows with a little bit of like energetic loving kindness. So it's not so isolating. I think settling with yourself in being comfortable with yourself and in that sense, and then on top of that, having a sense of loving kindness as a sort of way of being, that's kind of the starting place where you begin to see your process, where you could begin to see where you could be in control of what you're paying attention to.
Okay, yeah, I think that now it starts to even feel like by giving myself loving kindness,
Do
there
you have
is
do you
like
have
an
enough
op
loving kindness? Do you have enough
I
loving kindness?
I don't think so, but I can work on it. It seems like
Ah,
a very good starting point to just have it other blessings in cascade, like other processes starting up. So that's great. Um, okay, thank you so much for your reply. I'm gonna now call it up to Rachel.
You actually just answered the question that I really wanted to ask pretty perfectly, but maybe you could go a bit deeper. So I've noticed that when I do manage to take a step back from an inner emotional roller coaster of some kind, that I find myself left with a sort of vacuum that can be uncomfortable sometimes, sometimes quite uncomfortable. Um, it's like it's hard sometimes. Sometimes I automatically put something in that place that feels safe and good. But other times there's this sense of, okay, what now? Um, and then the anxiety can kind of creep back in at that moment. So my question is anxiety or sadness or whatever the emotion is. So my question is, how do we really ground ourselves in a sense of identity, for lack of a better word, that isn't based in passing phenomenon that are arising in our minds? Um, I feel like I could really benefit from some more practical advice on grounding into that and constructing a sort of experiential home within myself that feels like defined and consistent and fulfilling.
yeah, again, I think that the primary issue from uh, from a Buddhist perspective, the primary issue is where's your attention. So I think that the primary thing that people have to first look at is where is my attention, and honestly see where it is. My attention is now here. My attention is now there. This is what people are practicing in mindfulness. That's why mindfulness has become so popular. Is that people learn to pay attention to their attention, where their attention's going. And then as they observe their attention, they see what's arising. People use different techniques, but generally they're looking at what's arising. They see it coming, they see it going, they see the constant processing. So uh, they become kind of an observer of what's going on. Now that the observer, though, the actual awareness of the observer itself, uh, what's the nature of that observer? So the issue is you're observing that and you gain a certain amount of freedom in that. But when you take that back, that observer back to your life after you leave the retreat or you leave your cushion meditating, when you take that back into life, the conditions of life still have all their old karmic conditions to them. I mean, the life hasn't changed very much, if at all. So the problem is that there's two aspects to cultivation from a Buddhist view. There's insight, which is what we're talking about now in terms of attention, gaining some sense of control of your attention, and then there's cultivation, which is working through the karmic conditions of your conditional existence. So everybody here is living in a set of conditions in their conditional existence, which have been created karmically at many different levels. So there's a karmic level being born into this body, in this time, in this language, in this culture. There's all those karmic things. There's the family that you were born into. There's all these karmic conditions, many of which are way beyond our ability to, well, for sure, there's no ability to control them. But beyond that, there's no ability to even understand where they came from because a lot of them go so far back in time. So the question is, what can we? So all we can do then is we can't control all those conditions, but the place that we can control is our reaction and interpretation to what's occurring with conditions. So, but even if we gain quite a bit of control over that, over our through doing a lot of meditation or insight, even though we gain a lot of control over that, we still have to wait through all the karmic conditions that are already in motion. And so that turns out to be, for most people, the big problem is there's a massive amount of frustration in bringing that insightful person back into the reality of their conditions. And so this is where these other qualities of you need an extreme amount of patience, you need an extreme amount of generosity and gratitude, and a tremendous amount of open listening to what's going on, and be open to what's actually going on in your environment, into the conditions. And you need a lot of vigor and energy, and you need a lot of qualities that are not just from the meditation themselves, but are secondary qualities that you can develop through meditation. But you have to be very, very patient to wait out the transformation of the karmic conditions. Because whatever it is that isn't going well that you wanted to change, if you actually look at how long it's going to take to change those conditions, it could take months, it could take years, it could take, I mean, in some cases lifetimes, but that's hopefully we don't go quite that far in trying to analyze it. But so it's as important to have patience with the conditions as it is whatever insight you have in your mindfulness. Because whatever insight you have in your mindfulness can easily be undone by just becoming impatient with the transformation in your condition. That's what I see usually happening is people might even work really hard and have really great insights. But when they go to try to bring those insights into their conditional existence that they're actually living in, they get really frustrated that they can't change faster than they want, faster than they're able to change. And so I would say that patience in the long and waiting through the long-term conditions is equally important to the insight.
Um,
So everybody just wants change to they want the conditions to change too quickly. And because they want the changes, they're always dissatisfied. They never can wait long enough for the actual changes to occur enough so that they can actually discover the the insights with a new set of conditions that slowly but surely begin to match each other. But that matching takes time.
How, in terms of Yogacara, what what is going on when these conditions are arising continually, and we are losing patience? What are the things that are arising, and what is patience, or what is the opposite of patience, and what would be maybe stepping outside of all of this to be more of the observer of it?
Well, of course, not everybody here probably in this tonight's discussion is going to be familiar with Yogacara. I would highly suggest if you're interested in Buddhism, anybody that is interested in Buddhist philosophy or psychology, if you haven't studied some Yogacara, I would highly recommend it. It's uh, Buddhism developed a really extensive psychology that I think if more and more people would actually study it enough to understand the whole hermeneutic of it, it would actually do everyone here a tremendous amount of good to think through their lives and their experience through a sort of Yogacara hermeneutic. Essentially, from a Yogacara view, um, every moment of experience we're having, we live in this conditioned realm as I'm describing it right now. But the conditioned realm is infinitely complex and infinitely causal. So there's nothing in it that exists in its own right. Nothing in our experience exists not within an infinite set of causation. So the only way that we make any sense of that infinite causation at each moment of our experience is through imagining something or constructing something that we take to be the experience. It's really close to Kant's, representation. That we represent something, and these representations, are called, dharma. So dharmas are these representations that then take on the form of a memory. If they reach a certain level of intensity, they become a memory. Now, all of these initially are occurring in the senses. So we don't have time tonight to talk about the nature of how the senses function, but the senses are the realm, the windows through which all this experience is occurring. And then the sixth consciousness is constantly processing the material of the senses. The sixth consciousness is what we would call the cognitive consciousness that we use. And then there's two other aspects of consciousness in Yogacara, and that's the seventh and eighth consciousness. The eighth consciousness is all the memory seeds of all the memories that we've had from that experience is implanted in what I guess we would call, in a Western context, unconscious. But it's not exactly the unconscious of Freud, Jung, Lacan, or it's not a psychoanalytic unconscious, but it has some aspects that are similar. But these seeds are planted, and then they arise. They're constantly arising through the seventh consciousness into the sixth consciousness. So what's constantly being processed is the flow of those seeds of memory that when a sense experience happens, it triggers an association in the eighth consciousness. And so a seed of the eighth consciousness arises, a memory arises connected to that sense experience. And so we're in this constant flow of the arisal of these thoughts and emotions that are arising from our sensations triggering these associations with past memories. And this is a massive uh, mechanism that has a lot of different elements to it. So the key in it is, at least in the beginning, is again to go back to our earlier discussion. If we can get the sixth consciousness, the cognitive consciousness that's processing all this, if that can slow down a little bit and not be so hyperactive, as that begins to become less and less hyperactive, it begins to have more more time that it isn't reacting so quickly. And so by having more time in the sixth consciousness, there begins to become more and more freedom from the force of karma, meaning this constant associative process. So whatever you planted there in the past, particularly in this lifetime, through your childhood, your adolescence, and your early adulthood, all those things they're just constantly pouring through in association to things that are occurring in the present. And so from this vantage point, the place that you gain the freedom of mind is, first of all, by relaxing, slowing down, and not reacting so quickly in the cognitive element of the mind gives there to be more and more space, more and more stillness in which something can occur that wouldn't have been the mechanical process of your karmic conditions. So the problem right now with emotions and anxieties for most people is it's a mechanical process. It's just happening by association. And the more it happens by association, the more it's reinforced. So unless you figure out some kind of way to slow down that process from occurring, it just goes on and just keeps an endless process of cycling through. And so pretty soon, since you can't really deal with it, you just start coming up with all kinds of distractions and avoidances. And then you just try to create a life that's distracting enough so you don't have to pay attention to the suffering of your flow of consciousness. And so then you create a life that distracts you enough, and then you build an entire life around those distractions. So you just start limiting the scope of your consciousness to make sure that it doesn't go outside of the projections of your imaginations that you're trying to do to avoid actually have any real realization, and then trying to build a life that fits that and then contract. So aging is sort of the contraction of the freedom of consciousness through this kind of process. So unless you take a fairly radical move on this, it's almost impossible for the natural process to not just kind of continue on and on and on without really, with feeding, it just feeds itself.
Thank you so much. I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like you just read my mind. And I feel like my question is quite answered, but there was one that came up right at the beginning from someone in the audience that I think we haven't really touched on, and it's a great question. I think it's something that a lot of us deal with. I lost it now. But their question was basically, what do we do? Like, this theory is really helpful, and something, as Naelia was saying, that sounds great. It sounds great in theory, and sounds great when you're calm enough to put it into practice. But what about those moments when your emotions are really at their peak? What can we do to bring ourselves back to a place where we can start shifting our way of being and incorporating this type of wisdom and insight that we can gain from teachings like Yogacara.
Well, I mean, when you reach a certain level of, this is in Buddhist terminology, you're talking about afflictions, right? So in Yogacara terminology, the critical issue is uh, what you're attending to. What is the nature of what you're attending to with your attention? So what you need to do is to learn uh, the nature of what you're attending to. In Yogacara terms, it's wholesome emotion like uh, generosity is a very wholesome, loving kindness is a very wholesome. It actually has emotion. There's lots of emotions to generosity, but generosity is a wholesome emotion in that the nature of it, in dwelling in it, has many positive, free, not so bondage orientated aspects to it. Um, and then there's other kind of emotions that are a lot less free and are much more the very nature of them is less freeing. The three particular things the Buddha pointed out that are particularly important to pay attention to is, uh, you know, kind of lusting, desiring after something that that you find yourself more at the very beginning of moving forward, not in less and less control over. So as it first arises, you can actually watch the process where the mind, where your eyes are just there, you're sort of walking along, and then you see something, and then your mind goes towards it, and then it likes it, it wants it, then it spends more time, then it goes after it, it goes after it in the mind, it goes after it in the body, it goes after, and there's this movement towards it. As it goes down that road, it's less and less in control of the place where it would be able to not be overwhelmed. So once you pass a certain point in the process of desire, it reaches a point of affliction. When it reaches a point of affliction, the very nature of affliction is the mind no longer has the capacity to find itself as reflectively aware. Because every time it tries to find itself reflectively aware, it's overwhelmed by the desire. And so the second realm in which this happens is irritation to anger. So uh, we have all these, we're walking around and we have all this sense of like somebody mistreating us or not paying attention to us or whatever else that then causes us to get irritated, cutting in front of us, we're not getting our due. So we get irritated. And then you can watch yourself as you get irritated, the irritation grows. In the early irritation, you still have some mental control of it. But as the irritation turns to anger, you have less and less control over it. And then the anger eventually turns into resentment and so forth. And then you can turn into modern American politics, right? Where everybody's resentful. So there's a gradual progression from irritation to through anger to resentment to being, once it reaches a certain level of being overwhelmed, it reaches this level of affliction. And again, the nature of affliction is it's basically almost impossible to get back to that mind that can observe and be aware and get control over any attention once it's reached that level. So, unfortunately, we have to recognize that when the mind reaches a certain level of intensity, you will not be able to control it through the control of the mind. I mean, that's why there's Buddha. I mean, so I hope everybody, the reason that there's all these rituals and all this other aspect of, like you see in a Buddha hall, you see all these people bowing in repentance. You see them bowing and you see them reciting mantras. You see them reciting various. Now, some of that's for meditative, concentrated focus, but like repentance is a practice of giving up the place that the original irritation arose, and then the activities of the body and mind happen that caused the bondage suffering to other people and yourself that created the affliction that took over your mind that you now have no longer control over. So modern people, I don't think generally are willing to realize that when their affliction reaches a certain level, the idea that they're going to be able to control that from their psychological selves, from the place that they had, that where the human element of being able to be in executive control or disinterested observer or contented still mind, any of these kind of things we want to think about, whether they be from Husserl phenomenology or from Freud's executive ego or from Buddha's idea of, mindful observation, all these subtle elements of mindfulness or observation are only possible at a certain level of lack of affliction. So I have to say that people just have to realize this is why you can't just let yourself go with impulsiveness. The freedom of impulsiveness seems incredibly liberating at the moment of the impulsiveness. But the problem is, if you allow yourself that freedom of impulsiveness to a certain degree, it's going to be almost impossible to get back to the place where you would have any of those functions that we were talking about earlier through your own process of psychological control. And that's why there's all these other religious rites. That's why at that point, like at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, when you can't control you're completely out of control in your mind and afflicted, you go to the Buddha hall and you bow in repentance. How long are you going to bow in repentance? Hey, some of you would have to be bowing in repentance for like months or years. I mean, to undo a certain level of complete control of your mind that's been completely taken over by afflictions, to get back to where that executive, where there's actually that awareness that's under some control, may take considerable amount of time. I mean, you might have to claw your way out. I mean, some of you know from your own experiences, just unrequited love, just desire to unrequited love that goes to a certain point of affliction can take you years. Can take a multitude of years to claw your way out of back to the place to, you can get back in control. So I think the main issue here about extremes is you really should fear affliction. And if you really did honestly fear afflictions, you'd be much more careful with the actions you're taking in the present, because what seems to be spontaneous, what seems to be impulsive, if it has the possibility of leading to afflictions, in the long run, it isn't, you have to see that it's probably not worth the freedom of the moment of the spontaneity for the potential of the affliction that you have to claw out of for like months afterwards. This is why you have to, from this Buddhist framework, you have to step back and look at the current action in many, many different kind of ways, but primarily be looking at the quality of the emotion, the quality of the thought, the quality of the activity of body. Do you understand what the effect of that particular action will be? If you're not really clear about it, it's usually better to not take the action, because the potential of the downside can be much, much greater than the momentary, energy of the impulsiveness. So I think you get to a certain place, it's very hard. There's no like magic bullet for your issue that you're raising. I can only say that when you do feel that level of affliction, maybe you can learn enough from that that you're going to be a lot more careful about what you give yourself over to in the future if you get another chance. If you get another chance.
Well, I think that that was a great way to transition to Q&A. So I already have one question, but I would like to invite everyone in the audience to type their questions in the chat box. And so the first question is, they are requesting for you to give a concrete example to how ground this theory. I think it might be a little complex, but yeah, maybe you can
Uh,
think of
an
something.
example.
Yeah.
Um, well, we could go through like so the whole, if we're talking about Yogacara, it's a it's a whole mechanism that has moments that you can observe in it. So maybe I can, okay, so universally, every moment of your experience is happening at the level of attention, right? So what at attention, what right now everyone could define where they're putting their attention. They're putting attention to my voice. When you hear my voice, then you're making contact with my voice. The contact is the senses are making contact with that. So the contact is giving you now information. There's some kind of information in that that you're processing. And then that leads to a sensation. So you could observe how there's a sensation of that that's occurring. And then from the sensation, there's a thought arising from that. There's an ideation arising from that. And then from that, that thought moves your mind in some direction. It now has movement of mind towards something. So from a Yogacara, you're breaking down the component moments of thoughts, actions, emotions, and so forth into component elements so that you can see in those component elements how your thoughts, actions, emotions are constructed, how they exist, and how they create karmic conditions from the future in the process of them. And then so you could see anything. You're walking down the street, you look across the street and you see a figure walking down the street. At first, you're just completely neutral. The eye goes across the street, it picks it up. So the attention moves over to it. There's something about it that draws more of your attention, brings your attention fully into looking at everything. And that by association, you make an evaluation of it. It's a person. They look a certain kind of way. You have an immediate judgment of them. You judge them this way or that way. Let's say they're attractive. So if they're attractive, you peer longer. So you can actually watch the eyes peer longer and pay attention to. And as you pay attention to, you look at it, pay attention to, you then start wanting something about it. The very attention itself has some kind of wanting to it, some sort of desire in wanting to pay attention to it. And then as it wants it wants to then start taking action to have some kind of interaction. But between wanting and having some interaction, all your associations of yourself emotionally start arising by association from the age consciousness. So uh, if you're attracted to it and you think it's beautiful in some kind of way, then the first question is, could you actually be successful in engaging that or not? Because you have a history that then comes into play that then has emotions connected to it of relationship. And all the history of that comes into play, and you doubt yourself. You can look at something very attractive and become completely depressed in in 20 seconds from the association between the beauty, wanting the beauty, and then feeling that in the past you failed with that beauty when you wanted it. And so then feelings of failure and impotence and blah, blah, blah come up to take the place. And a depression, and you're now in a depression from association from 5 seconds, 3 seconds of having your eye go to pick up something across the street. And that's happening in every moment of sensation. You see a car, your eye goes to the car. There's a whole process of interaction that occurs with that car. So if you actually started to observe the sensations and the moment-to-moment processing of them, you would see that this massive amount of association and habitual association is arising all the time. And you can actually see where every negative mood, every positive mood, every emotion actually arose from association. But now when you're walking around, you're not attending enough to the moment sensation. So by the time you're in an emotion of depression, you probably missed by several hours oftentimes, or whatever amount of time, what was the actual interaction that caused the triggering element of the association that then triggered this whole. So I don't know if that's an example, but does everybody see? We could get into it in more and more detail. You could just take it into every moment. And you could just watch yourself doing this all the time. You can watch your eye going out to something and being attracted. Ear, you're walking down the street. You hear a song. The song something halfway interesting to you. Lana Del Rey's, something. Your ear goes to. You pick it up. There's an entire history of association with that song, with your experience of that song. It's bittersweet. Each one of us is going to have a totally different experience of association from that sense experience. So you can see that it then the whole day could be triggered into all kinds of associative emotions from any given sense experience that then triggers this whole sequence. So the whole trick, no matter how I give examples of it, the whole trick is the earlier you catch it in the process, the more freedom you have. That's an absolute rule. There's just one absolute rule. The earlier in the process of this associated process of sensation to, desire to wanting to then wanting to hold on to whatever, blah, 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 all these different activities going on. If you can retain a certain amount of stillness and quiet and a little bit of control and not move so quickly, then slowly but surely you'll create some space and some place to observe the movement. But it's not just in meditation. I mean, people say this has to be taken out into every day of experience, every moment of experience. All you're doing when you're doing sitting meditation is you're just practicing the skill of this observing mind in the most ideal conditions without it being so attacked by the conditional. But unless you can take that skill out into every moment of your life, it actually isn't that useful. It's just almost like escapism. I mean, meditation isn't escapism, it's developing the skill that you take to every moment of your life. So you have to take that skill out and you have to have the same level of observation you have sitting after a couple hours of meditation at the third dhyana. The third dhyana by itself is a great escape. It's wonderful. But unless you can take that out into more and more moments of your conditional existence, it isn't doing that much good to transform your karmic conditions. In fact, it could be just an escapism. And a lot of you that meditate, you have something even worse. When you get into the conditions, you get pissed off that the conditions are bothering you. Excuse me. What the hell are you doing? Okay, what? So if your meditation, if you're back in your conditions and they're bothering you, you missed the whole point, right? Because either they're escaping and it's an escape mechanism from your existence. You have to take it back to your existence. So you have to be able to, you have to keep practicing whatever level of meditation, you have to bring it back and try it out to every moment of your existence and see this process begin to become more and more refined in your awareness of the process of this moment to moment mechanism of mind that actually, if you learn about and study, you can see operating all the time, like in every moment of experience, you can see this mechanism operating.
Wow, I think that I'm having so much to think about for later. And right now, I would like to make a pause because we hit the time for this talk. Don't worry, we're gonna continue. We have some other questions, but for those who need to leave right now, thank you so much for joining us. Here in the chat box, we are going to share some events, some links for future events. Doc has a class on Wednesdays that it's open for the public, and there you can register. We have an Amitabha retreat and some other upcoming events in our webpage. So we really invite you to click and to discover what Dharma Realm Buddhist University has to offer for all the people. And thank you. Well, we are going to continue with other questions for those who can stay. Just 1 second. So the question is, how can we create a space in ourselves for reflection when the world feels overwhelmed with suffering? I often find myself filled with anger that has no outlet or direction, because I know it won't heal the suffering I see, yet I'm still angry at the world. I feel so relatable. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it goes without saying that isn't going to be helpful, right? So it goes without saying. You're feeling compassion for the suffering, and then you're just in anger. That is not going to work. So I think anybody can realize you definitely don't want to do that, because there's absolutely no value for you or the world in that. So we have to be really, really careful that as we become more sensitive, we don't actually become more actually destructive to ourselves and get angry and actually destructive with other people. We have to be very, very careful, because right now, the way things are, it would be very easy to be overwhelmed at any turn. And we have to, if we're going to make any actual difference in the world, stay cool. If we cannot stay cool and kind of attentive, we're neither going to be functional to change it in any way, and we're very likely to cause more resentment, anger, frustration that's already there. So don't become part of the problem, okay? This resentment, for instance, has spread from one group to another until everybody's resentful. We now have an entire election of resentment, right? So, you know, we had, uh, you know, we had people, groups of people being very upset about the injustices of things, completely rightfully, and right injustices, and feeling really resentful and trying to do something, and then then pushing other people who then became resentful, who then pushed other people resentful, until we finally have, we have basically a massive numbers of different tribal groups that are all in various forms of resentment towards each other. Now, the question of whether it was justified or not, what has what's that?
No, sorry, I think that someone had their mic on,
Oh,
but we are taking care
yeah.
of it.
So from a cultivating standpoint, it's extremely important that if we really want to do something about the world, that it starts with ourselves getting quiet, still, compassionate, aware, having a sense of loving kindness, compassion, and then becoming strategically intelligent about actually having effect. It's not enough to just be passive. I agree with that. But you have to be bringing an attitude of peacefulness, an attitude of contentment. You have to be bringing an attitude of something that the vibe that you're giving off is actually cooling off the world rather than heating it up. If you're going out with a vibe of anger, you're just heating it up more than it was already hot before. It's not, it not only does it not do any good, it's not even neutral. So it's extremely important that everybody takes the responsibility first to realize that before they're going to do anything useful, they have to get calm enough, still enough, and strategic enough to be able to actually manifest in their own being a difference of existence. If you're not manifesting a difference of existence in yourself, then what good are you out there with your anger heating up everybody else with your anger? What good is that? It's not a question of being right or just or injustice. These are important questions. But at this point in time, we have to all take responsibility for manifesting a being, manifesting an existence that the very being of which taken out to interact with other people has some positive qualities of generosity, some loving kindness, some calm awareness, some true compassionate helpfulness. And so we have to be very careful not to, because of exactly this problem of being so sensitive to what's going on, then get into negative emotions and negative moods about it, because that isn't going to help ourselves or anyone else. Yeah, I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but it's really each of our responsibilities to get in control before we head out to try to make a difference. If you're going to teach, it's the manifestation of who you are that you're teaching. It's not the content you're teaching. It's the manifestation of your being that you're teaching. You can teach, if you're going out to do anything, it's the manifestation of your being that you're taking out there into the world to as we all have a kind of aura of our presence. Is that presence calm? Is it angry? I mean, so we first of all need to work on ourselves in this moment of time and bring a being that that cools things down rather than heats things up.
Well, yes, I think that question that is very interesting since sometimes the unsettled emotions come from of what we think a place of caring. And I don't know, especially for myself, I have this question of if I don't care, then I'm like, what is going on? Am I being like now I don't care about this issue, but I want to care, but I cannot do much. So I get angry. It's kind of like a funny cycle.
Well, caring is hard. Caring is
Well,
vulnerable. So
yeah.
caring is vulnerable. So, I mean, everybody has to understand here. If we're going to actually be compassionate, what are the qualities of compassion? The first quality of compassion is opening up and listening to what's actually going on with the other sentient, what's going on with the other person. When you open yourself up in that kind of way, you're vulnerable. So the first problem is most people don't want to be vulnerable, which I can understand, and open themselves up to listening in that kind of way. And then that listening, so you can only be as compassionate as you are still. So the degree to which you have patience and stillness is the degree to which you can be open and listening because it's the only place that you can take. If you try to care and you don't have enough stillness to care, then very, very quickly, the care is going to turn to angry because you can't do anything about whatever it is that you care about. Now, what's anger? Anger is a re-empowering. Anger re-empowers the self from the vulnerability, the feeling of vulnerability. You see, when you're vulnerable and you can't do anything or don't know what you can do, then the anger is an automatic response that puts the ego, the self, back in control. Because in anger, you're always you're always you're fully righteous in yourself when you're angry. So the self has full righteousness in anger. So doesn't everybody see that anger is just the natural tendency that emerges when we're vulnerable, where we stay vulnerable and can't do anything in that vulnerability about resolving anything. It because as soon as you're angry, you're no longer vulnerable. Can't everybody see the internal sense of as soon as they're angry, they're no longer vulnerable?
Yeah.
So, you know, when you open up this vulnerability, you have to have the capacity to be in that vulnerability. Most of us don't have the capacity to be vulnerable for very long, if at all. So there's no way that we're going to be able to cultivate without vulnerability. So you have one of the biggest things you have to develop in meditation is vulnerability. One of the biggest things you have to develop in your mindfulness is vulnerability. And you have to be in your sensitivities and practice being vulnerable and learning how to be in vulnerability without being frustrated or overwhelmed or getting angry or irritated or something. So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom. We have a final question, but maybe in the meantime, while you're answering that, people can comment what were their takeaways from this talk, and then we will be finished. So someone who was familiar with Yogacarya, we're asking if you could recommend any books.
well, there's that new Waldron book. So there's a really great new book. I don't know if I have it here, uh, somewhere here. I don't know if I have it here. Oh, I can get it. Listen, what I forget what the but the Waldron teaches at some Eastern Coast school. I forget, but he came out to DRBU last semester. I think he's on sabbatical to Nepal right now. But William Waldron has a new book on Yogacara that he spent about a decade working on, and I think it's a really, really, really right now, if you're going to read something in English that's trying to interpret Yogacara with incredibly thoughtful approach, it would be William Waldron's new book that he just came out with in the last year and a half. You could probably get it up there if one of you guys looks it up real quick. Uh, I don't actually have the name of it right here, but William Waldron, I would highly suggest that book. If you want to get, of course, there's a lot of books that you could read to get more technical, but I would take that book first, and then if you some thoughts come up around that book, then there's a whole list of books we could actually send you guys all. We could send out something through the site, maybe a bibliography on what to read around Yogacara. But I would definitely start with that book. Do you guys have that on there? Or William Waldron. So what's the name of that? Somebody probably on there on this thing knows what the name of that new text is because we were using it.
Is it making sense of mind only?
Yeah, making sense of mind only. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to read a book right now of a very thoughtful approach that Waldron worked on for a really long time, I would read that book.
Quite a bit. Thanks everybody for sticking with us, and I hope you guys got a lot out of tonight. I know I did, and we hope to see you at future events. Please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions or recommendations for future events. And we'll be sure to get those recordings out to you. And it sounds like a list of books that Doug would recommend on Yogacara would be something worth including in that email too. So have a good night, everybody. Take care.